can you explain? Is because we didn't know before, or how can you explain that our ancestors, our grandparents, they didn't really have any sensitivities and now we do have? Is different the gluten that we do it now than in the past?
I think there definitely is some truth.
So thank you very much, Dr. Petersen, for being here at the Keto-Reunion Diet Solution Summit. I'm really thrilled to have you to clarify a little bit the big discussion between gluten sensitivity, celiac, is gluten good or not for us? So thank you for being here. But first, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your health journey and your background.
Sure, and thank you so much for putting this on. I know what a tremendous amount of work that it entails. So thank you very much for your dedication to health and healing and wellness. My story, I think it's frequently common that doctors get involved in a certain area because either they themselves or a very close loved one had issues. So I find myself very common in that arena. I, as a kid, I was unhealthy from kind of the get-go. I used to have very high fevers and seizures and things like that when I was very little. I don't remember that, but apparently like 104-degree and 5-degree fevers. And then as I got older, I had a lot of fatigue. By the time I started hitting puberty, I was passing out from low blood sugar. So my blood sugar was so erratic, I would just fall to the floor and pass out until the body kind of reset. I had migraines 2 to 3 times a month. When I wasn't having migraines, I had what I used to call my regular headache, because literally every day of my life I had a headache. It was just making the distinction of whether it was a migraine or not. Had a lot of PMS, a lot of really horrible menstrual cramps, fatigue, body pain. So it was really a disaster. But my mother was exactly the same. She had the migraines. She used to pass out from the low blood sugar. So all of that we had in common. I was her only daughter. I had 2 older brothers, but of course my pediatrician said, it's genetic and there's nothing you can do. Personally, I had wanted to become a pediatrician at a very young age. So I'd always wanted to be a doctor. I loved kids, so I thought I'll become a pediatrician. And then I was a pre-med in college, molecular biology major, and I was going to hospitals volunteering every summer. And it was very interesting. I was put on different projects, but as my mother started to find nutritional help, we did start to do better. And it was just sort of basics of, you know, not processed food. And she was a great cook, so we actually didn't consume very much processed food. But we found a nutritionist. He was giving us some vitamins, and she could really tell a difference. I could tell a difference. And then, you know, in the hospitals, I was like, so, you know, what do you guys think about vitamins? And this was, you know, 30 some odd years ago. And they're like, oh, complete waste of time. Don't waste your money. It has nothing to do with that, right? And no help from there. So I had this sort of, you know, little bit of a dichotomy of, I was experiencing help, my mother was experiencing help, traditional medicine was saying it was nonsense, and then sort of everything else that went along with the hospital setting. I went, yeah, I don't think I can do this whole medical doctor route. So I found chiropractic and then functional medicine. My husband and I, we just saw Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who is the founder of functional medicine, just 2 weeks ago at the annual IFM conference. And we were joking, and I was like, we were at the seminar where you named the Institute for Functional Medicine, because he was saying, I don't like alternative because I don't think it should be an alternate, you know, and we were just bandying around all these different names. And then we came to, well, we're restoring function, and that's what it's about. And so literally we've been doing it that long since before the Institute even existed. So it's really in our DNA to think that way, to think with the body as a whole. So then fast forward to having children. I had 3. And my littlest one was not very healthy. She was kind of super skinny, and, you know, same mom, same dad, breastfed all 3 of them. I had them close together within 2 years, all 3. But she was just not that healthy. And at that time, there was a newer, at that point, salivary test that early days, saliva to look at gluten. So we did that with her. We did that with my mom, and they both came out positive. And as I said, we have better testing now, but this is literally 26 years ago. And then the knowledge that it was likely a genetic link, and of course I was the only genetic link between the 2 of them. I was like, oh no, because I was completely addicted to gluten, completely. I was the classic kind of, no, this is my friend, pasta's my friend, I'm half Italian, and, you know, just sort of loved all of that. So that was really the beginning. We had always looked at, you know, cleaning up patients' diets and looking for sort of food reactions, but now we actually had a test. And as I said, better tests now, but that was the early days. And we started to find people reacting to gluten who were not celiac. So they did not conform to what happens when someone has celiac disease. Yet it was very obvious for myself, my mom, then also my daughter, and hundreds of patients fell into this category. And, you know, you were asking, well, you know, gluten sensitivity, celiac, gluten intolerance. And in our book, The Gluten Effect, I sort of just created these terms, not celiac, of course, that had been around, but I sort of created my own little nomenclature of gluten intolerance being the umbrella term above sensitivity and celiac, you know, because in both cases you can't eat gluten, so clearly you're intolerant. That was my thinking. But yeah, we created this term, and the book was published in 2009. I'm working on the next edition right now, but in those early days there was really no validity given to it. It wasn't until we published 2009, it took me 5 years to write the book, but it wasn't until 2012 through 14 that the researchers, celiac researchers around the world said, there really is such a thing. And then they termed it non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or the NCGS for short. But this, you know, real problem that was not celiac, but still people were intolerant to gluten. So anyway, that was probably long-winded, but that's my story.
Well, no, that's a really, really inspiring story, because a lot of people can really relate to it. I do relate to it. I had, you know, I was constipated my entire life. I had candida overgrowth. I was overweight, hormone imbalance, and gluten had a lot to do. So when I removed it from my diet, everything started going back into place. It took time.
Nice.
Patience. Is very important. But actually a lot of people always ask me, how can you explain? Is because we didn't know before, or how can you explain that our ancestors, our grandparents, they didn't really have any sensitivities, and now we do have? It's different, the gluten that we do it now than in the past. I'm from Spain, so it's all gluten carbohydrate based diet.
I think there definitely is some truth that the older wheat is a different product. They talk about the development of hard wheat, and that was to weather harsh winters. So they kind of altered the grain, and the product is more tolerant to the harsh weather, but it has a higher gliadin, you know, content to it. So there is that. And then of course we have glyphosate and, you know, the terrible toxins. But I think Dr. Alessio Fasano, who is the most brilliant researcher in this field, really said it well when he said there's 3 factors involved with developing celiac. You have to have the genetics, you have to consume gluten, and third, though, you have to have an unhealthy gut. And I really think that's the change. because the genetics are that 40% of the population have the genes. The incidence is not 40%, but over time, we're seeing it increase slowly. So we're seeing that increase, and it's really about the gut. And he and I spoke together once on the same stage at the same conference. And I said, so theoretically, just theoretically, if we really got a very strong gut microbiome, you know, a brilliant immune system, could one theoretically, you know, like not have celiac disease anymore? And he said, no, I really believe that that's the case, because I just don't know if it's achievable. But yeah, he really felt that was the difference. And that's what we've seen. So I think, you know, when people go, wheat, you know, it's been around forever, what are you talking about? You know, and they're right. It's just that it's us, you know, we've gotten so much less healthy, and that's why we're suffering. Because before it was like, maybe the immune system didn't like it, but it was strong and it just dealt with it the way it'll deal with an amoeba or a parasite coming in. It's like, okay, well, this isn't the best, but fine, I can weather it, you know. And now, because it's so overburdened with other things, it's not tolerating it.
Yeah, that's true. My grandfather used to work collecting wheat, and they didn't have any processed diet. It was all whole foods. So their gut probably was healthier than it is now.
Totally.
Didn't have those many pesticides, wasn't genetically modified, which is also a big thing. 99%.
That's all.
Yeah,
that's what we're suffering from. And that's why we're seeing the increase in autoimmune, and I mean, the increase in cancer. I mean, really across the board, all these degenerative diseases, we're seeing more and more and younger, just because of our environment, both the chemicals in our environment and then what we're eating both.
Yeah. So talking about sensitivity, intolerance, celiac that you've been already talking about. So how can you, like a lot of people say, maybe I have celiac disease, and then they get a test and they don't have celiac disease, so they get confused. I think they can eat gluten.
Right.
How do you think is the difference, the symptoms, the difference between sensitivity, celiac, and if there are specific tests to identify each of them?
No, that's a really good question. And it's interesting about celiac. You know, why is it that here it's been a full decade since I published my book, the degree of diagnosing the disease has maybe gone from, 9 to 10 to 10 to 11%. You know, we miss 90% of the people suffering with celiac. So our diagnostic abilities have not improved at all. And so there's many different reasons. So with celiac, it's a bit about building a case. You know, it's almost like you're an investigator and you're building these layers, you know. Back in 2012, Dr. Fasano and about 11 different other researchers from around the world did the 4 out of 5 rule. And that was having the symptoms of celiac, which of course there's a lot of different symptoms, improving when you get off of gluten, you know, seeing an improvement, having a positive blood test, robustly positive, you know, so if it's the reference range is 2 to 7, you're at 14, 21, you know, strongly positive. And then having the genetics, as I mentioned, and then a positive biopsy. So, and I say the biopsy last because still today, so many gastroenterologists use that biopsy as the gold standard. And again, Dr. Fasano has said, a good 7 years ago, he goes, it's not the gold standard because you have to have so much damage before that's positive that you're missing the subtleties. Dr. Marsh, you know, the Marsh criteria that is used in an endoscopy of sort of how much damage has been done to the villi, the lining of the small intestine. He is the founder of the Marsh criteria, and he was interviewed by Dr. Tom O'Brien, and he said, they misinterpreted me. I mean, it's his criteria, and he said he's been misinterpreted. And what his intention was is that as soon as you left Marsh 0, which meant perfectly fine, villi, that as soon as there was some inflammation, not an inflammation, and then white blood cells infiltration, that was the word I was thinking of, let alone then damage, actually degradation. So it goes from inflammation, infiltration of white blood cells, then the actual degradation. He wanted it to be that it was positive as soon as anything negative occurred. And we wait for this complete annihilation of the villi. So often people are like, yeah, the blood test is positive, but we'll do the biopsy. And then as soon as that biopsy is considered negative, and a lot of times erroneously, so I'll have people send me, I hear from people all over the world, and they send me their tests. And I'm like, but the Marsh was actually like a 2 or a 3, and that's indicative of, per Dr. Marsh, that's a problem. So we have that. We have sort of erroneous information about how to even do an endoscopy, which still kind of blows my mind. And then you have the fact that there's different ways you can have celiac from a physiological standpoint. So there are some people who will never see that degradation because it's more neurological, and they're being affected in different systems of the body. So that's why they created the 4 out of 5 rule. And so the genetics, the blood, the feeling better off of gluten, and having the symptoms, as soon as 4 of those criteria are met, you're not required to have that 5th criteria. And again, even though it's been 5-6 years since that research, most doctors don't know about that. And they also just do like a TTG blood test, and they don't do the IgA and the IgG, which are different forms of the immune system, as you know. They don't do the endomysial test. They don't do the anti-gliadin antibody. They don't just build the case, So I find that it's just like one TTG, and that was negative, so we don't need to do a biopsy, you're fine. So many people are being given bad advice, Yeah. And so then if it's legitimately not celiac, and you've really done a good, diagnosis, and you've really investigated it, then there's blood tests. There's a company here in the US called Wheatzoomer that we use, and there's also Cyrex Labs, which is CYREX. Those are the 2 best tests that we really liked, because they look at about 15 different criteria of how gluten can affect the immune system. So indications of celiac, meaning the autoimmune aspect, where you're actually attacking the lining of the small intestine, versus just your immune system is reacting to this protein, maybe not in an autoimmune sense, but having the reaction. And that really is the distinction between celiac and gluten sensitivity, because gluten sensitivity is not an autoimmune disease, but you still have your immune system not happy with that protein. Yeah. And they talk about the fact that a lot of the extra intestinal, meaning outside the intestine symptoms, more common with gluten sensitivity. So you get the brain fog and the joint pain and the mental emotional symptoms, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, seizures, the list is so long, so when someone says, well, how would I know if gluten doesn't like me? And it's like, oh my gosh, that's a very long list. So it's skin reactions. And so they call it the great masquerader, because gluten can be at the back of so many different things. So I always say to patients, we're going to do this blood test because it's a silly thing to miss. That's what I constantly say. It's like, if that's there and we miss it, it's too big a thing to miss. So we have to do this test,
No, that's very interesting, and thank you for sharing the lab, because people could always access to it and then take it to a functional medicine doctor or the
Yes.
primary doctor. So that was really interesting. So talking about the symptoms, you are talking about ingesting gluten can affect symptoms, like for example, brain-related disorders, ADD, ADHD, anxiety.
Totally.
So how gluten is causing those symptoms? How is affecting our second brain?
I know, exactly. The second brain. It affects it. It was initially discovered as a digestive problem because it was found in children, failure to thrive, short stature, diarrhea, abdominal pain, the big belly. You know, that was the classic picture. And so as people would develop it later, I mean, when I was trained in school, you know, you memorize all these diseases and you were told it's rare, you know, usually children, the failure to thrive. So you have this image in your head of this skinny little kid, you know, who's not growing, has terrible diarrhea, and you go, okay, I got it, you know. That's not the picture. So I try to make the distinction between the classic celiac, which is what was discovered, you know, hundreds of years ago, versus today's celiac or gluten-sensitive patient. And they can be overweight, they can be regular weight, but that connection between that protein and it being neuroinflammatory, meaning affecting the nervous system, brain, nerves, also just nerve pain, so it can be throughout the body, but also specifically brain related from brain fog and, as you said, depression, anxiety. There's a long neurological list. And I don't want to mention a name because I'm not sure if he's exactly the one that said it, but there is one of the, it might have been Dr. Haji Vasalu, who said that he felt that if celiac was being discovered more in the 20th century, that it would be categorized as a neurological disease before even a digestive disease. And that was based on research that showed that it can be affecting the nervous system years before it ever affects the gut. And sometimes, and that was me actually as a gluten-sensitive person, with as much of a mess as I was, I had zero digestive complaints. And I always tell that story to patients. It's like, you know, you can have a food creating a problem and you don't have belly aches or constipation, or like my mother was chronically constipated and my daughter loved to projectile vomit. So they both had digestive complaints, but I had zero. And that's what's so variable about gluten, but it's absolutely known to be neuroinflammatory. We've had a lot of seizure cases where, you know, EEGs are done and all the testing, and it's like, we don't know why you have a seizure. That's where gluten is often the culprit.
Yeah, and what you said is very interesting because there's a big misunderstanding. There's people that say, no, but I don't have any digestive issues, so I don't think I have any gastrointestinal inflammation. This must be something different. But everything starts in our gut, so it can be manifested in many other different forms. But what do you think is the main issue? Do you think it's because when somebody suffers from gastrointestinal inflammation, gluten is a really complex protein that is indigested, so it starts circulating around as a very dangerous toxin? Or is the inflammatory response against gluten the one that is causing the damage?
I think it's a little bit of both, honestly. One thing Dr. Fasano in his research found that even patients who are not celiac and not gluten sensitive, so this is the quote unquote normal group, they still get a leaky gut for a short period of time when they consume gluten. So that's when you have to stand back and go, are we supposed to be eating gluten or not? I mean, the joke is that it's, as you said, such a big complex protein that you need 4 stomachs like the cow, you know, to digest it and then go back again and again and again. Because as humans, we cannot properly digest this protein. Even if we're not in either of the categories of gluten reaction, we're still not properly digesting it. Our immune system is dealing with it, which is fine, you know, for that patient. But if it's not really a protein that we can break down properly the way proteins are designed to be broken down, then should it be considered a food? You know, that's that's really an interesting point. But I found that research really fascinating, that it was transient. The leaky gut didn't last as long as in a celiac or gluten sensitive person, but it still happened every time they ate gluten. And then if you think at least about the average American and how often they eat gluten in a day, my gosh, it can be every meal plus a snack. And so, and that leaky gut is allowing those proteins that have a neuroinflammatory nature to now circulate and create problems. It also, of course, partially digested food, bacteria, parasites, it's allowing entrance into the bloodstream of things that a healthy gut, a not leaky gut, wouldn't allow. So you're putting a lot of burden on the body because of it.
Yeah, and talking about the microbes imbalance, that our microbiome is controlling everything. We are more bacteria than human. And there is a very interesting study from a university in Virginia that shows how when immigrants, we are coming from other countries and then we get adjusted to the standard Western refined carbohydrate diet, and gluten has a lot to do, our microbes in the gut change within a couple of weeks. And it's less diverse than it used to be when we moved here. And that was a big cause. So they have been following up this population, and they started having more issues like obesity, arthritis, diabetes, a lot of conditions that were related to gluten and refined carbohydrates and all the bacteria in the gut.
Right. No, where my practice is in California, in the heart of Silicon Valley. So we're sort of halfway between San Jose and San Francisco, and it's Apple and Microsoft and Adobe and, Google and all these companies. And they import people from all over the world, brilliant engineers come here from all over the world. And that's what I hear. It's like, wow, I got here 2 years ago. When I arrived, I was very healthy. Now I've gained 15 pounds. I don't feel good, and it's the food quality. So here in the US, it's, and you've probably experienced this. I mean, you're from Spain originally, but probably when you go back to Europe or you have friends and they say, oh, I go back home. People would say, oh, I take 3 weeks in the summer and I go back home. And within about a week, I feel so much better again. So it's bad that we have to work so hard here, but we really do.
Yeah, what you said is so true, because I always say, okay, I go home, and then I try to enjoy the food when I go, things that I don't usually eat here. And even if I do that, I still lose weight. I feel much better. I don't feel that bloated. Even here, I always try to buy organic and try to always live in an anti-candida diet myself. Yeah. But again, it's the quality of the food.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And so, it's like we're here, we have to make the best of it, but we have to work at it so much harder. And as you said, the microbiome is such a fascinating area, and we keep learning so much more about it. I have a lot more to learn, but it's everything. The gut is everything. So Hippocrates, right? He said all disease begins in the gut. And this was, he knew. Smart man.
So do you think since gluten is causing so many problems, in order to prevent getting these issues, it's important that we remove gluten from the diet since we are kids, or just when we start manifesting a condition?
That's a good question. I think that in a perfect world, I would love it if by the time a child is, 3-4 years old, that we do a test. They've been consuming gluten at that point, and as you said, they're not. Let's say they're not manifesting problems, because then, of course, we could do it sooner. But this is, a healthy, happy child, and we're just simply doing the blood test to say, okay, immune system, tell us, do you like this or don't you like it? And then if the immune system is reacting, I think they should stop. I really, really do. And I know there's parents who say that's just inhumane and it's so unfair. And it's like, for me, I mean, I raised 3 children, and the youngest was the one we discovered. So by the time she was 2, 3 years old, the other 2 were 5 and 7, you know, but their whole lives, you know, they've been off gluten, and they enjoy wonderful health. They're adults. And, you know, I think for me, of course, health is everything. That's all I do. So, you know, did they go to birthday parties? Yes. Did they have fun? Yes. I was the one that created the birthday cake with the gluten-free brownie. Now, you know, we're not saying this is high quality food, but, you know, I was the one who used to bring these special things to the birthday parties that were such a hit that the moms were like, oh, how do I do that? So that's what we did. We ended up like just changing the whole birthday cake scene.
Gluten-free food and healthy food, they still taste good.
Exactly. So to ensure my child did not miss out, you know, we brought our own chocolate brownie cake, right? And then of course everybody's like, oh, what's that? And and it was so delicious. Everybody wanted it. So yeah.
And I think it's okay to remove the gluten since they are kids, because that is when they start learning what to eat. So they don't really know what they are missing anyway.
It's true. It's true.
And they
Sooner
don't start
is
getting
easier.
addicted, because usually it's mostly refined carbohydrates. So that's what's causing the addiction and why they miss it so much.
Yeah. And I think there is a truth to be said for the people who are not celiac and not gluten sensitive, but react to grains, is a lot of times they're reacting to those highly processed, highly refined grains that are not real food anyway, you know, and at least here in the United States, you know, nobody sits down to a bowl of wheat berries, you know, just like they do to a bowl of rice, you know, it's just not, or millet, or even buckwheat for that matter, quinoa a little bit, you know, but it's just not American, you know, it's just not what's there. It's the white bread and the pasta and the crackers and all these super refined foods that we know are not good for anyone, you know. So if somebody really doesn't react to gluten, and not everybody does, then it's like, okay, now the next layer is that we don't want refined foods. And so at least in America, by the time you've taken out the refined grains, you're pretty much gluten-free anyway, because nobody's eating the whole grain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But avoiding all those refined, starchy, gluten-free crackers and muffins and breads, because they still cause a lot of damage.
I call them gluten-free junk food.
Yeah. No, totally. I agree.
Yeah.
So for a person that suffers from celiac disease and wants to avoid any contamination with gluten, do you recommend to go just for whole grain, gluten-free whole grains, or do you recommend better to go for a grain-free diet?
That's a really good question. It's very particular to the patient. So like the Cyrex lab that we mentioned earlier has a nice cross-reactive blood test. And this tends to be temporary for the most part, but it's looking at foods that have a common, similar protein structure to gluten, that when the immune system is overtaxed and overwhelmed, it's almost like an autoimmune type of response where, because it's so overtaxed, it can't tell the difference. And there are grains on that list, dairies on that list. There's a few different foods. There's about 14 or 16 different foods. So what's important about that test is that when you're in the early days, the whole idea is to just give the immune system a break and really let it heal. So I like that test because it'll identify those foods that the body thinks are gluten, even though they're not, you know. And then, so you take that away for about 3 months while you're doing all the rest and looking for the hidden infections, and maybe we'll have time to talk about that. I call it the secondary effects of gluten. So we're doing all of that, and then we slowly reintroduce. And if we can reintroduce in good quality, you know, like a quinoa, like making it whole, and everything seems fine, then I think they're fine to go back to the whole grains, not the refined, but again, the whole grains. And then there are people who just, for various reasons, just don't seem to tolerate, you know, we can't get them back in. So then, okay, we've tried. There's still plenty of food to eat, but, you know, maybe not in the grain category.
Yeah, I'm kind of like that person. I always had
Yeah,
a weak digestive system, so when I tried to put certain foods back, like for example grains, it didn't really
right.
work for me, even if my gut was much better. So yeah, it depends, as you said, of every body is different, and
Yeah. I was
but
like that. It took me years and years and years to get back to oats. So I make a granola and it's mostly nuts and seeds, and I just do a little bit of oats, and I do a nut and seed bread, which again is mostly nuts and seeds, but has a little bit of oats just to bind. And it was really years of just building more and more healthy. And now and I just did a blood test to confirm, and I'm not reacting. So, it's just that level of getting stronger and stronger.
yeah, but as you said, this is true that there are a lot of grains that have a really similar structure to gluten, some of the proteins, and it depends also which condition the person has. For example, thyroid problems, agglutinins, phthalates that are in a lot of grains can cause a lot of damage. So it's
Exactly.
why I created this term, the Ketoranian. It's kind of like the best from both worlds. It's like a low carb diet, cutting the grains with the influence of the anti-inflammatory diet from the Mediterranean, but also cutting the grains, dairy, all of those foods that cause inflammation in the body.
Yeah, no, I really agree with you on that point. While we will test for, dairy, I don't think anybody should eat dairy, because that's something that, just from a natural standpoint, it's a mammal making milk for her offspring. And I know I get in so many arguments. People on YouTube get very irate with me sometimes, but I was like, I'm sorry, this is my opinion. And I've just seen it too much. So when we take a patient and they're really purely off any animal milk or cheese or butter, etc., for 4 to 6 weeks, and they're perfect, when they reintroduce it, they experience a negative reaction every single time, which you can't say everybody's sensitive to gluten, because they're not, but dairy, yeah.
Yeah, casein and gluten, I consider they are the two big red flags for gastrointestinal inflammation.
Absolutely. And then they have their addictive quality, because they have that opioid effect that they do in the brain, which makes that, I've got to have it. And people get a little, nervous if you talk about taking it away from them, which passes.
When you tell them, oh, you gotta cut gluten and dairy, but then what I'm gonna eat now?
Exactly. Yeah.
Sending.
Yeah. They feel like you've just taken away their two best friends. Absolutely.
So, and actually there's people, because they don't want to cut gluten, before they eat something with gluten, they take an enzyme. So what do you think about gluten digestive enzymes to prevent the
Right.
damage?
I think as long as you understand what they can do and what they can't do. So they really are about that accidental ingestion. It really is about, oh, they put a crouton on your salad, and then instead of remaking the salad, they just kind of took it off and there's still some crumbs left. It really is about that. It's not about knowingly taking the bite of the pizza or eating the cookie. They're not designed for that. They're just trying to ameliorate or lessen the response that your immune system is going to have. So it's not creating as bad a cascade, but it's definitely not licensed to cheat. And it's unfortunate, because there are some companies out there on Amazon, and you see them and it's like, oh, you can, and oh, it makes me so upset, because it's not fair. It's very, very much false advertising. I mean, even the vaccine by Dr. Anderson, it really is about that cross-contamination, that accidental, so that you're not getting yourself into later in life creating cancer and various problems, but it's not a license to eat it.
Yeah. So yeah, taking enzymes doesn't fix the issue. So That's the message. And talking about treatments is exciting and promising that a possible vaccine
Yeah.
for celiac disease is going to
Yeah.
be out in the market.
Uh-huh.
Was designed by Dr. Robert Anderson.
Yes, yes.
And I would like to hear your thoughts about it. Do you think that vaccine is going to allow possibly people to go back into eating gluten?
Well, you know, the vaccine was fast-tracked just this last January, so just a few months ago now, meaning, you know, human trials and all of that. But the quote that I saw, and I was sort of getting up to date because I had met Dr. Anderson probably 12 years ago. I mean, the dedication of these people that spend the better part of their lives on a single entity, you know, has my undue respect. But the recent quote I saw just from last January was that it really was about the accidental contamination. It wasn't about, let's sit down to a bowl of pasta. So as I said, that was just sort of a quick perusal on my part. I wanted to, you know, kind of see the up to date because I had heard it was fast tracked. But that's what he was quoted as saying, that it was for the accidental ingestion and not for, here we go, let's eat gluten. And then there's just the facts of vaccines. And there's a lot of negative reactions that we see, like the HPV vaccine that came about. Oh gosh, it's been out for a while now. And I mean, vaccines really have to be out for a while before you start seeing some of the negatives. So vaccines, I'll be honest, make me a little nervous. And, you know, things have to be out for a long time. I remember my daughters were just at that, you know, kind of pre-puberty age. And my medical doctor here at the clinic, she's since retired, but she said, oh, there's this new vaccine. And I'm like, between the word new and vaccine, no, not interested, you know. And then come to find out, you know, there's definitely side effects. And some people are saying neurological autoimmune disease. And it's like, oh, okay, I don't think so, especially for something like HPV, which A, is so pervasive, but as a virus, if you have a strong immune system, which of course is what we're all about, then you can always, you know, pretty much always get it back under control. So yeah, that's my long-winded answer for that.
Yeah, and it's true that vaccines could have a lot of side effects in the nervous system, and they usually contaminated with mercury and other heavy metals.
Right.
So it's mostly what is on the vaccine more than the target that they are trying to work. Yeah. And for a person with celiac disease, do you recommend any other specific supplement that help them always in having a strong immune system and prevent inflammation?
I think there's a lot of different nutrients that we know can be deficient in the early days. I mean, those villi, as soon as you get off gluten, you know, those villi really do grow back and you start absorbing better, which is great. For me, the biggest thing, I mean, certainly there's the fat-soluble vitamins and calcium and magnesium and zinc, and there's, you know, a number of different things, vitamin D, of course, that many people can be deficient in, and that is important to get them on a strong multiple and, you know, do a blood test and see what their micronutrient levels are. Iron is another one, especially in women. But then the secondary effects are really the big ones for me that I see, because you can be lucky enough to get diagnosed with celiac, and meaning, you know, you're not the 90% that are just missed and suffering. So you get the proper diagnosis and you can be very, very good about eliminating gluten from your diet. And in most cases, that's not enough. It's just not enough, because you have this poor immune system that's been compromised for years and years and years, and opportunistic organisms have gotten a foothold in the gut. The microbiome has gotten compromised. There might be other sensitivities. There, of course, the genetics that you have to have in order to be celiac can be moving you toward other autoimmune as well. And so getting that complete healing and that full restoration of the immune system, the elimination of gluten, while is tantamount and absolutely the first step, is usually not enough. And I have people saying, I'm so perfect. I never eat out. I only cook my own food. Why am I not better? And I let them know, I'm like, it's fabulous what you're doing, and what you're doing is absolutely correct. And the fact that it's not enough does not make you the minority. You are firmly in the majority. 90 some odd % of patients are like yourself. Now we just have to get to work on the rest. And I think that message is really an important one, is to understand that you have to discern if gluten is a problem, but then there's a lot of other steps, which, you know, a doctor that's functional medicine, who's certified in functional medicine, and not just a specialist like a cardiologist, functional medicine, or, you know, OBGYN, but someone who looks at the body as a whole, can really start looking at those layers. Nutritional genomics is something we've added to the clinic in the last several years, and it's been such a lovely addition, because you can have these little SNPs, they're called, little defects that, you know, mom and dad come together and make us, and sometimes they balance each other out, and sometimes they kind of, you know, come together in not so good a way, and it puts us in the position where there's certain enzymatic processes in the body that we just can't do, you know, so we can't jump from here to here, and because genetically we just can't. And so you find out what these little SNPs are, and then you add natural nutrition that allows that process to sort of flow again, and that can make such a huge difference in, you know, children with ADD and on the spectrum, adults with autism, and honestly, anybody in between. So it's something, as I said, we've just been doing the last several years, but it's been such a wonderful boon, you know, to the practice. And, you know, my husband and I, same us, 3 kids. The 3 kids are all different. It's so interesting, you know, because it's just that luck of the moment and what genes you pull in. But it's very powerful, and I love it because it's natural. You're just using nutrition to kind of help bridge the gap. Yeah.
Yeah, it's bioidentical with the body, but this is very, very important. The field of epigenetics is a really new field, how we can control the expression of our genes. So we cannot blame our parents anymore
No.
about things that happen to us, because we may be carriers of that gene, but we can control how we express it with nutrition and lifestyle. So that's
exactly. So yeah, working on that microbiome is everything. And then if the defect is just really strong, that's where the very particular nutrition just can help, you know, bridge the gap. But no, it's fascinating. We keep learning more and more, which I love, of course.
It is. So thank you. Do you have any last message that you want to share with people?
Sure, definitely. Well, I want to thank you again for putting this on. It was amazing. It was really my pleasure. I think for people listening, it's very important to, depending on where you live, and I know in different areas of the world, it can be a little bit more difficult, but like as an example, my clinic is a destination clinic. So people do fly in to see us from around the US certainly, and then sometimes internationally to a degree as well. But find that certified functional medicine practitioner who will do the proper testing, because it's just over and over and over, we appreciate the fact that if you're not eating well and you don't have a healthy gut and microbiome, it's impossible to be healthy. You know, you're just going to completely miss that boat. And these degenerative diseases that are truly killing us are happening younger and younger in Americans. And, you know, you have 8-year-olds who are already pre-diabetic, and it's ridiculous. And it's also preventable and correctable. And so, yeah, I would say find a certified functional medicine practitioner. If you need help finding one, reach out to me. We're happy to do that. And yeah, I hope it's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the work that you do. It's really, really important. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.